The Newsagents USA.
Whoever heard you get indicted for interfering with a presidential election where you have every right to do it? You get indicted and your poll numbers go up. When people get indicted, your poll numbers go down.
We shouldn't laugh, but we might a little bit. That was Donald Trump explaining that he did interfere with the election and he did get indicted for that, but that he thought he'd come out of it quite well. There's quite a lot to unpack in that one statement, which is the man who has solidly refused to admit ever that he lost the 2020 election is now suddenly admitting to election interference.
What Donald Trump was entitled to do was make legal challenges to the results. He did that. The results were found to be fair and the results were certified. But what he then went on to do was to call for an insurrection where he asked people to come to Washington and said it was going to be wild. Donald Trump has said out loud the thing that he hadn't done until now. Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA with Emily Maitlis and John Sopel.
It's Emily.
And it's John. And I am outside in southern Italy. There is a rolling thunderstorm around where I'm standing. I am undercover, but if you hear odd rumbles, it's not me kind of indigestion after a big lunch. It is a thunderstorm.
It is the pathetic fallacy. It's what happens when you start talking about the Donald Trump campaign and the rumblings have begun. And there is a kind of theme developing here because in the last few weeks, certainly since the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, perhaps since Biden stepped down completely, Donald Trump is starting to sound increasingly untethered. And as you said, Soaps, all these things that are meant to be sotto voce or off mic are suddenly coming up in major set-piece interviews like the one he just did with Fox News. You have a plethora of moments now to choose from where Donald Trump is talking about losing the election by a whisker or election interference or the stuff that he has been denying solidly for the past 4 years.
I suppose the thing I'm wrestling with is this Donald Trump clearing up little messes that he hopes will go away before the election in 2 months' time? And if you cast your mind back to 2016, Donald Trump called a news conference at the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C., where suddenly he says, you know, all those times I've been saying Barack Obama is not a legitimate citizen of the United States of America and that he was born outside and there was this whole birtherism conspiracy. He suddenly announced weeks before the election, I no longer believe that. No explanation, just I no longer believe that, because it was so damaging to him, because he couldn't provide any evidence that Barack Obama was born outside the US and therefore not legitimate as the president. So he tried to clear up that mess. Is he doing the same again now? Or is he just, as you say, Emily, becoming untethered? Because for him to say, well, I actually probably did lose in 2020 by a whisker, then what has the last 3.5 years been about? What has the attempted insurrection been about? What has all the lies and the fueling of this conspiracy that somehow the election was stolen from him, if he is now admitting that he lost the election by a whisker?
You have come in with the principle of charity, which is kind of find the beneficial interpretation or the benevolent interpretation of what's been going on. And Donald Trump's trying to clean up, as you say, the little messes before the big one begins. None of that, though, seems to tally with the other positions that he's taken on, for example, policy. And one of the areas where we know he is absolutely terrified right now is on the issue of abortion. American women are now, according to the latest polls, putting abortion above even the economy in terms of the salience of the issue going into the 2024 election. Donald Trump has spent the last 6 years talking up the changes to the Supreme Court that have allowed for the overturning of Roe v. Wade as the hero that he sees himself to the evangelical right, to all those Americans who feel deeply uncomfortable with abortion. Except now he's suddenly clutching at straws and saying, oh, well, actually, I don't want a federal abortion ban at all. Actually, I do want each of the states to do it. And actually, I've now decided that maybe the Florida one, the one in Florida that could cut abortions back to making them legal after 6 weeks, I'm not sure I like that at all. Don't forget, Donald Trump is a Florida resident. He actually gets to vote on that issue. And he last week told reporters that he didn't think, he wasn't entirely clear, but he didn't think that he would be drawn towards voting in favour of a 6-week abortion ban in Florida. What's that about?
In Florida, the state that you are a resident of, there's an abortion-related amendment on the ballot to overturn the 6-week ban in Florida. How are you going to vote on that?
Well, I think the 6 week is too short. It has to be more time, and so and I've told them that I want more weeks.
So you'll vote in favor of the amendment?
I am going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. Look, just so you know.
Incredible, right? Incredible that here is the man who's put the 3 Supreme Court judges on the bench to overturn the sort of freedoms that American women had to seek abortions in every single state of the US. And now Trump's saying, I don't like that ban at all.
He's got himself into a cleft stick over this because on the one hand, he is infuriating the evangelical right by saying stuff like this, that people need more than 6 weeks, because Donald Trump was going to be seen as the pathway to a complete ban on abortion, which is what people in the US of that position have been wanting for sort of half a century. And now Donald Trump seems to be going in the other direction because the polls are moving against him. And so you have Donald Trump in risk of alienating huge numbers of women voters, the group that go out in the highest numbers to vote. And therefore, this is particularly hazardous for Donald Trump to be doing this right now. He can't do it. And so I think that what you're seeing is Donald Trump, in a way, trying to square a circle that is unsquareable. And I think that that is particularly hazardous for him. Donald Trump is going for the bro vote, i.e. kind of athletic young men who like to party and drink in huge numbers, whereas Kamala Harris is going for the non-bro vote, the people who are kind of a bit more sophisticated than that and, understand that women's rights are important. And you're never going to have seen, I think, such a gendered election in the US, because I think Donald Trump is now lining up to be the voice of male voters, and Kamala Harris is trying to get women, but also a certain section of men as well.
I agree. I don't think it's that simple, actually, in terms of the men-women breakdown, because you've got men who care deeply about, their families' rights, and you have men who are would-be fathers like Tim Walz. I think, truly, Trump has been triggered by Tim Walz, who has told the American people about his own attempts at IVF after, his wife's infertility.
Thank God for IVF. My wife and I have 2 beautiful children. He thinks he needs to dictate that. And I've been saying this, the golden rule that makes small towns work so we're not at each other's throats all the time in a little town is mind your own damn business. I don't need him to tell me about my family. I don't need to tell him about my wife's health care and her reproductive rights. I don't need him telling my children what books they can read.
And now Trump has done a complete 180 turn on IVF. We know that many Republicans did not support the expansion of IVF for American families and voted against it, including J.D. Vance. And now Trump has come out with this extraordinarily generous offer, which is that insurance companies should pay all costs related to IVF to anyone who wants to try for children and can't. Just listen to this.
Administration, your government will pay for, or your insurance company will be mandated to pay for, all costs associated with IVF treatment, fertilization for women. IVF treatment.
It is extraordinary because he gets a big round of applause in the hall because people are genuinely excited by this. There will be millions of childless American couples who are thinking, oh, thank God, that could be the answer to all our prayers. So on the one hand, it's a really clever electoral policy. On the other hand, it doesn't go with anything that we've heard from Trump over the last 4 years.
And look, we've discussed this before. We've had Donald Trump, who has a long record of making misogynistic comments. You go back to the first debate that Donald Trump appeared in, and he kind of, Megyn Kelly reads out the list of ways he's described women that he hasn't liked. And, he kind of makes a joke of it all. And on and on and on it goes. And you've got J.D. Vance, who talks about, childless cat ladies. I think it's going to be very difficult for the Republican ticket to win back the vote of women, given all the past statements that we've had. So Donald Trump risks alienating his evangelical base at the same time as not winning back the women. And the fact that there is that applause in the room when he talks about payment for treatment of IVF should be ringing alarm bells, because it shows how much on the wrong side of the argument, just in terms of numbers, in terms of voters, Donald Trump has got himself.
Meanwhile, as he was working out whether he was kind of pro or anti-IVF. And we should say that JD Vance, his VP, was later asked about Donald Trump's comments on IVF on a Sunday show and was completely thrown. He clearly hadn't expected to be talking about this.
You also voted against a measure in the Senate that would have guaranteed access to IVF around the country. So,
well, two things, John. First of all, yes, a court made that decision in Alabama, and like the next second, the Alabama state legislature fixed that problem and ensured women had access to these fertility treatments. And all that I voted on, John, is for religious liberty. I don't want Christian hospitals or Christian charities to be forced to do something that they don't want to do. We have multiple Republican measures that support fertility treatments, support IVF, but don't require Christian hospitals or other religious organizations to violate their...
So you've got this very, very strange relationship now between Trump and Vance, where Trump is kind of going off cuff, saying what he wants, saying what he thinks the crowd needs to hear. And Vance is kind of running around afterwards, kind of shit-shoveling, trying to explain how that becomes an economic policy for the next administration, which he can't do because they've never even discussed it.
That is the complete rerun of the Trump administration from 2016 to 2020, where he would say things off the cuff, and then behind the scenes, in the West Wing of the White House, they're going, he said what? He's done what? Have you seen what he's tweeted? No, he hasn't. What are we going to do in terms of policy? And things that they thought had been agreed, hammered out, kind of gone up the system, up the chain of command, got the approval of the commander-in-chief, and then he goes out in front of a TV camera and says the complete opposite. And, look, we've seen JD Vance over the past few weeks in a way that maybe we haven't seen him before. He's not that agile. I mean, he's good in a confrontational interview where he can sort of hold his own. But as we've discussed, when he's speaking human, it sounds like he's struggling with it.
At the Republican convention, we were featuring everyday American workers, and of course, we had Hulk Hogan. And while it's tempting, and I'm sure it would make some big headlines, don't worry, everybody, I'm not going to try to take off my shirt here.
The ticket of Trump-Vance, which looked so clever when it was Joe Biden that they were up against, is now looking a lot less smart.
There was a moment at Arlington Cemetery, and to put this in context, Arlington it's got a kind of totemic significance for America, hasn't it? It is the place of the war dead. It's the cemetery in Virginia, just outside DC. And this is the place that you go to pay respects to the fallen. And Donald Trump is having to explain right now to his critics who believe he turned a moment at Arlington Cemetery into a photo op, and indeed why he sort of pushed one of the officials aside. Of course, let's not be too naive. You could say that anything the candidates do between now and November the 5th is going to be a photo op of sorts. Donald Trump is not president. He doesn't have to actually be anywhere. So the fact that he's turned up at Arlington Cemetery suggests that it is part of his campaign. It is part of a photo op in a wider sense. But he is now facing criticism from, for example, John McCain's son, Jimmy. John McCain was a war veteran. He was a captured soldier in Vietnam, and he was a senator, much respected senator of Arizona. And this was what his son said when he came out and endorsed Kamala Harris.
You make it political, you take away the respect of the people who are there. I feel that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz embody a group of people that will help make this country better.
As you say, Arlington, which is just across the bridge from the Lincoln Memorial, is sacred territory for Americans. And look, it's fine for Donald Trump to go and pay his respects there. It's fine for Donald Trump to be with Gold Star families, as he was. And a Gold Star family is someone whose son or daughter has been lost in service. The problem is that JD Vance went to a rally. Again, this goes back to the point we were just making a moment ago about IVF. JD Vance goes to a rally and goes,
there is verifiable evidence that The campaign was allowed to have a photographer there.
On Monday, Trump's TikTok account posted video of him visiting the grave of a soldier killed during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Federal law prohibits political campaign or election-related activities within Army National Military cemeteries.
And then 20 minutes later, campaign video drops of Donald Trump at Arlington. It's exactly what he was doing. He was filming an advert at Arlington Military Cemetery, the most sacred place probably in the United States of America, where America's war dead are buried. Again, you just thought, how can you be so clumsy? How can you be so clunky? And yeah, the families might have approved that were with Donald Trump at the time. Of course, they're MAGA supporters. But for the rest, for the other people whose sons and daughters are buried at Arlington Cemetery, I mean, it was shocking beyond belief that he would try to use that as the place to film a political ad, which is what he did, which is now available on Truth Social.
Yeah, and many of Trump's children, as you know, have been deeply devoted and worked alongside his father and even advised him, arguably quite badly in cases. But there is a nephew, Fred, who came onto MSNBC to explain what he felt Trump's attitude to the military was.
I know many people who were in the military, and I had the pleasure of speaking on an interview with National Defense Radio, which goes out to the armed services. And I told the truth. I basically told this story, and I said, he just doesn't give a shit about them. He just doesn't. It's the great God.
And look, there are reports of all sorts from when Donald Trump was president, and he didn't go to the Marine Cemetery in France from the First World War, where America's war dead were buried because it was raining heavily and he thought it would ruin his hair. There is the story of that John Kelly, General John Kelly, a four-star general who's lost his own son in combat, said that Donald Trump was disrespectful when he spoke about the military, that anyone who died was dumb and idiots, and why would they do that sort of stuff? So there is past form on this. Of course, Trump denies all of these things. But, you know, when four-star generals are giving their accounts of what they have heard when they have been the chief of staff to Donald Trump, and you've got Donald Trump, who has a history, let us put it at its most generous, of not being altogether familiar with the truth at times, you know, you've got to think that there is something to this. But Donald Trump is trying everything. You know, the word of this podcast, I would say, is untethered, because it just seems that he's doing stuff now that is slightly off the script that he thought he would be, you know, reading out loud with Joe Biden as his opponent. And he has not adjusted yet.
We spent a lot of this half talking about Donald Trump. We're going to look at Kamala Harris. Where are things going well for her, and where is she struggling? Coming up.
So if you were with us last week, we were discussing when would Kamala Harris do her first sit-down interview. And sure enough, it has happened. She sat down with Dana Bash from CNN. And I think, Mateless, you and I have discussed in the past the fact that American TV interviews are not quite the same as a politician might expect if they were to come, say, on the Newsagents podcast, where I think maybe there was a bit more searching and a bit more rigor and a bit more kind of pushing back on statements that are made. Kamala Harris went on this CNN interview with Tim Walz, her running mate, and that's quite common for these interviews to be done jointly during the campaign. And she was essentially trying to get rid of some of the negatives of her own side. We talked about that with Trump. She was saying, well, no, she wouldn't ban fracking now. And she was very concerned about the border. And she was trying to show herself much more a centrist politician than she had been painted hitherto. Let's hear a bit of that interview that she gave to CNN.
When you were in Congress, you supported the Green New Deal. And in 2019, you said, quote, there is no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. Fracking, as you know, is a pretty big issue, particularly in your must-win state of Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you still want to ban fracking?
No, and I made that clear on the debate stage in 2020. I have always believed, and I have worked on it, that the climate crisis is real, that it is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time. We did that with the Inflation Reduction Act. We have set goals for the United States of America and, by extension, the globe around when we should meet certain standards for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, as an example. That value has not changed.
But did Dana Bash lay any gloves on her? Well, did Dana Bash try to, really, is the question.
I tell you what I heard was somebody who had gone into that interview knowing that they had to touch each of the hard questions once, but that ran away from any kind of follow-up. And so there was a list of questions which was like, oh, you must ask about fracking. You must ask about change of positions. You must ask about what you knew about Joe Biden. And yes, she sort of ticked off each of these questions once, but there was absolutely no pushback. And I think Kamala Harris chose brilliantly. She chose where to land this interview, where she was not going to get a single scrape. And as a result, she looks as if she's got through, as it were, the first round of interview. She hasn't, really. All it takes is somebody who's a little bit more probing, a little bit more robust in terms of the answers that she gives, and says, well, hang on a sec, where are you now? You know, you say you haven't changed your mind. Where are you on this? What did you know? What did he say? As opposed to somebody who kind of, you know, goes towards the fire and then runs away from it. And so I think Kamala still actually has many of those questions to address.
I'm not sure I agree with that. I think that Kamala Harris will just tell interviewers, now, I've answered that. No, I've dealt with that question. I've got nothing more to say on it. And how many more sit-down interviews is she going to do? We're only 2 months away from the election. We've got the debate next week. Is Donald Trump going to prosecute, a cross-examination in a way that you would do in a courtroom? No, he's not. He's going to kind of make ad hominem points, and he's going to go after her, and he's going to say, you're the most left-wing, you're the most liberal, you're the most whatever. That's the tone of Donald Trump. He's going to be trying to goad her in the debate, and Kamala Harris is not going to go there. But she may not give that many more interviews. And so those questions will be left unanswered about why she's changed her position on fracking, why she's changed her position on immigration, why we should believe that she's staying true to her values, even though she's changing her mind on all the policies. So I think that there are problems there for Harris, yes. But she'll say, I've done that interview already. And, it will be hard to get her back into a studio to do many more sit downs, would be my guess.
Let's just have a listen to what she was asked by Dana Bash.
How should voters look at some of the changes that you've made, that you've explained some of here in your policy? Is it because you have more experience now and you've learned more about the information? Is it because you were running for president in a Democratic primary? And should they feel comfortable and confident that what you're saying now is going to be your policy moving forward?
Dana, I think the most important and most significant aspect of my policy perspective and decisions is my values have not changed.
I thought there was one bit, though, that Harris dealt with very effectively. Donald Trump clearly wants to get into a scrap. He clearly wants culture wars to be fought. And, you remember that comment that he'd made when he said, I didn't really know she was black. She's only recently become black. Well, Dana Bash pressed her on that. And it's worth listening to the exchange.
I was a little bit surprised. People might be surprised to hear that you have never interacted with him, met him face to face. That's going to change soon. But what I want to ask you about is what he said last month. He suggested that you happened to turn black recently for political purposes, questioning a core part of your identity.
Yeah.
Any
same old tired playbook. Next question, please.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Let's talk about.
Yeah, what you heard from Kamala Harris there was an absolute refusal, a resistance to being drawn into this identity war, culture war, defending herself, defending her race or her identity or her colour or any of that stuff. She just said, next question. And I think that was probably the smartest thing to do, because we're all kind of in that space, I think, right now, in sort of, to greater or lesser extent, obviously her greater than most of us. But you have to decide whether you're going to pick your battles, on social media, with critics, with the people sort of, trying to goad you into saying something. And she's gone, actually, I just don't need to touch that. I might answer you a question on policy. I might try and answer a question on fracking. I might try and answer a question on whether my mind was changed. I might try and answer a question on whether I believed, Joe Biden should have pulled out earlier. But actually, if somebody's asking me about my race, that's their problem. I can be in their head rent free. I do not care.
And that's the thing. The Trump campaign had set so much store and hope that she would be taken apart limb from limb and would be shown to be shallow and inarticulate. And nothing of the kind happened. She was perfectly articulate insofar as she was pressed, and with all the reservations you say, Mateless, that she really wasn't given that hard a time and there was no real pushback on the points that she was making. But she was articulate, she was smooth, and the Trump campaign was hoping that she would fail. And at the end of it, on Truth Social, Trump posted one word in block capitals with 3 exclamation marks, and the word was boring. Well, if that's the best the Trump campaign have got at the end of the first critical test of Harris, and remember, there are very few set pieces between now and November the 5th. Of course, we've got the huge one next week with the debate taking place between Trump and Harris in Philadelphia. But after that, it's campaigning. And so, important momentum changing moments, just like in the UK general election, when you have the budget or the kind of Queen's speech or whatever happens to be. In the US elections, it's the big sit down interviews and it is the debate. And there is going to be one debate. I doubt there's going to be another one. And so far, Trump hasn't got what he wanted.
I mean, boring, let's not forget, was the entire election strategy for our own new Prime Minister. He wore it well. And I don't think Kamala will be that distressed to read that Trump found her interview boring. That's about the best thing. I think it was Robin Cook, wasn't it, who used to say, I know that an interview's been a success if I don't read about it anyway the next day. I mean, bluntly, that's
and weirdly,
how you want
I've
to
just
play
read, Mateless, that Deborah Mattinson, who did a lot of the polling for Labour in July's general election, is on her way out to Washington to advise the Democrats as well on how they can, play things between now and November. So I think that there is an element in which, although our election systems are so different and the way campaigns are run is so different, there are bits the Democrats want to learn from Labour. And there were a huge number of Labour people floating around, in their spare time on annual leave at the Democratic convention a couple of weeks ago in Chicago. And, they are talking to the Dems, to say, look, can we be of help?
We'll be back talking about the race in a second.
So, look, there's a massive polling out there, and I'm not sure what it adds up to, apart from a blizzard that is hard to navigate your way through. That, some states showing Kamala narrowly ahead, 7 states now in play, a lot of them very tight, all within the margin of error. There's undoubtedly been a momentum shift, but there are areas where Kamala Harris is still lagging behind the coalition that Joe Biden brought together in 2020. And so although Kamala Harris has improved the Democrats' position among black voters, it hasn't got back to where it was in 2020. She's improved the position with Latino voters, and that hasn't got back to where it was in 2020. And she's improved the position among young voters, but again, still not where Joe Biden was when he fought Trump the last time. So I think those are the kind of benchmarks by which we need to judge whether Kamala Harris is really making progress. So progress, yes. Has she turned it around? Nowhere near.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you listen to us, you'd assume that electorally Trump is a basket case and Kamala's going to swim to victory. I don't think there is anything clear-cut going on here. I think the Democrats are still rejoicing that they made the decision they did back in July, but it is fiendishly tight. And obviously, we said this before, it's not about the national vote. It's not about your jump in the polls nationally. It's about what happens in these tiny, tiny, tight margins, sometimes down to about 10,000 votes in the swing states. It looks as if Kamala Harris is gaining ground in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin. It looks as if Trump is similarly opening up the gap between him and her and gaining ground in the Sunbelt states, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona. So you could end up with this slightly odd geographical split where Kamala starts doing much better in the sort of the northern states, or the sort of the Great Lakes states, the Midwest, and Trump starts to do very much better in the Sunbelt states. And there is this one state, curious, that is split into two lots.
I know where you're going with this, mateless.
Go on.
This is your cephalogical fantasy, isn't it? Come on.
It is a bit.
I want to hear it.
It is a bit.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, we've seen the Veep play out. We've seen the absolute tie in, on TV and sort of in the dramas of 269. It needs 270 to win. And there is one state, Nebraska, where the electoral college is actually split in two. Most of Nebraska is deep, deep red, and there is one little bit around Omaha which often goes blue, Democrat, with just one electoral college vote. It is not impossible that the two could be tied on 269 with this division of sort of, Sunbelt states versus the Midwest, and Nebraska could end up being that deciding vote.
Honestly, God help us if we get to that situation. Can you imagine?
I'm all in.
Oh, no, God. And look, Biden won decisively in 2020. And look at the to-do there was after that with Trump claiming victory. If it is 269 versus 269, God help us. I mean, really, it's absolute nightmare, a constitutional nightmare, quagmire, Supreme Court involved, everyone involved, and, probably disorder on the streets to boot. Before we go, though, we ought to just consider
my rival.
Well, yeah, your rival in a certain way. She is the chair of the RNC, so the Republican National Committee, the most important body that the Republicans have. And I'm sure she got the job purely on merit. We're talking, of course, about Lara Trump, daughter-in-law of Donald Trump, and that would be the only reason she got the job. And what was the message, Emily? Have you been across it, that she was giving out to the American people?
She was telling them that I can do anything goes. She took me on as the singer-in-chief, and this is what she sounded like with her message to the American people.
Without your bravery, we're all out of luck. No, this can't be denied. You gotta be special.
I don't think she sounded that bad. I mean, I say this.
Oh, come on.
Really?
I mean, my Pastor Vongole is kind of likely to reappear at the moment.
Oh, so is it just me that you hate singing?
Well, no, I hate her singing more than you. Frankly, I would listen to you all day, every day.
Okay,
you're
allowed to come back now. Please come back. And next week, we will be bringing you the debate. And everyone remembers what happened last time. Two presidential candidates sat down to debate. The world was let loose. So we're going to be watching that for you at some ungodly hour of Wednesday morning, Thursday morning, and we'll bring that to you on the show next week.
We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.